Thanks for logging on to Wayne.com and welcome to this week 11 edition of Inside the Zone. Justin Kinney of Optimum Performance, as always, in the chair to my left. And Justin, sectional semifinals. This is one of the best weeks of the year, if you ask me, because you get 6A back, you get 5A back. We've already got a taste of the playoffs with 4A through 1A. What are you most looking forward to this week as the sectionals get started in earnest across the board for the state of Indiana?
Well, I think there's a lot of intrigue in this area with 5A and 6A because you look at Snyder, ranked number 1 in 5A in both polls, so a lot of people are feeling pretty good about them. Northside wants to show that they're capable of winning a sectional for the first time in 30 years, and Bishop Dwenger wants to show that they can bounce back from that regular season loss to Snyder like they did last year and knock off the Panthers. Oh, and you have the Carroll Chargers ranked in the top 5 or 6 in Class 6A and trying to show that perhaps they can reach uncharted waters in terms of area teams in Class 6A. So a lot to be excited about in the two higher classes getting started this week.
A lot to talk about this week. Let's start off. We'll go 6A down through 1A.
Let's do it.
And we'll start off with those Carroll Chargers because I would love to have this as a game of the week had the game been at
Been
Carroll.
here, right?
But the game is on the road. A 7:30 kick is what I've seen most recently at Penn. You're talking about undefeated Carroll, a 7-2 Penn team, but a Penn team that has played some really good competition. Those two losses, nothing to sneeze at.
No, absolutely not. And this is probably the worst possible draw for Carroll. Not only have to play Penn, which is probably the best team, in my opinion, in this sectional, and that includes Carroll, and you have to go to Granger and play them. And so for me is how does this team travel? Carroll all of a sudden has to get on a bus for an hour and a half to get to a game. You don't have to do that at all when you are in the regular season playing in the SAC. You're taking a sophomore quarterback as good as Jimmy Sullivan has been, and you're putting him into a pressure situation on the road to open up the playoffs. 6A is different. I say it's murder. It's absolute murder, and Carroll has a huge challenge to start off on the road.
The losses to Penn, as they come in 7-2, are to Cathedral.
Not bad.
Not bad. And St. Xavier, St. X, out of Cincinnati.
Not bad.
So not all losses are created equal.
Correct.
And, those two losses, I certainly imagine, toughened up a Penn team. I mean, it's just a really, it reminds me a lot of Snyder. It's just generally a difficult team to get past, especially in the postseason.
Penn has been down for the last couple of years, but they seem like they're back as advertised this year. And I know people will look at, okay, 9-0, 7-2. You just cannot compare records in this case. When you're looking at a Carroll team as good as they have been in the SAC, Penn plays a more difficult schedule, and I don't think it's close. And their two losses are against teams better than any other team that's in the SAC, in Cathedral and St. X. So for me, throw the records out. It's cliche, but you cannot judge Carroll by 9-0. You cannot judge any team in the playoffs by their record, particularly when you start playing these powerhouses that are stepping out of the state to play teams. This is a tremendous challenge for Carroll. They have to be ready in all facets of this game.
Other half of the 6A Sectional 2 bracket, Elkhart at Warsaw, both teams 7-2. So that'll be an intriguing matchup as well at Fisher Field. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Hopefully Warsaw can advance, and we'll talk more about the Tigers and Bart Curtis and what he's done next week. 6A Sectional 3, it's not a great draw for our teams.
No,
We've got Homestead at number 1, Hamilton Southeastern, undefeated HSE. Fishers at Northrop. John Harrells has Fishers as a 52-3 winner is his prediction. So it's not looking real good for those teams. Homestead has, I would guess, the better chance to win, although HSE is fairly dominant anytime you're ranked number 1 in 6A.
Yeah, it's going to be extremely difficult for this. So how do we polish this one to sound good? But Northrop's in trouble, Homestead is in trouble.
Yes.
And that's pretty much it. Homestead, they played up and down through the course of the season, but being thrown into the fire, having to go down to HSE and play, it's not going to be good.
No. 5A Sectional 12. You've got Anderson at Northside. Anderson comes in 3-6. Northside a heavy favorite in that game. But I want to talk about the other game in that bracket, which is our Highlight Zone game of the week. You got Snyder versus Dwenger. I know people are going to say, well, it was 28-0 just a couple of weeks ago. We saw this last season where Snyder wins by double digits in the regular season, and just a few weeks later, the tables have turned.
Absolutely. That is what's being guarded against at Snyder, I can tell you, all week long, is Kurt Tippmann reminding his players that last year we came out, played terrible in the rematch against Bishop Dwenger, and got clipped and our season ended. Now you have to guard against it even more because you're the number 1 ranked team in the state. Everybody's looking at you to make a run. Eyes are on you now, and Bishop Dwenger would love nothing more than to knock you off that perch. So before anybody in that program can look ahead to a prospective rematch with Northside, and I know so many people in this city are already looking at that, Snyder has to make sure they're not looking ahead because Bishop Dwenger is good enough to clip them, and you have C.J. Davis who can make plays, Carter Minix who can make plays. These games can come down sometimes the little things, the special teams, and both of these two teams are very good in that regard. You put a ball on the ground here, interception there, short field here. All of a sudden, you're talking about a much closer game than expected on Friday.
Yeah, and Dwenger has used Preston Rossmore, which is at 6'8" is a matchup problem anywhere he's put on the field. But you talk about that game, it was just 7-0, like mid-third quarter.
Yeah.
I remember talking to the Snyder team and coaching staff about it when we were out a couple of weeks ago about the rematch, and they were like, it's a lot closer than people thought.
Right.
Because Dwenger's going down to kick a field goal to make it 7-3 in the third quarter.
Right.
And they return the block kick for a touchdown, and it's 14-0, and that's a 10-point swing just right there. And then they had to get a little bit desperate with a young quarterback in the fourth quarter through some picks. That quarterback now has more experience. They've got more experience playing with him. I feel like this, not that it's primed to be exactly what we saw last year where the tables completely flipped, but it was closer than 28-0 in my opinion, and it has the potential to be another great game.
And you have the confidence of a Bishop Dwenger team that proved people wrong last year. And to your point, they played that Week 8 game closer than people think. They feel like they're better than they were a couple weeks ago. And definitely their quarterback has settled in a little bit more than that first game. And they did it last year. So I don't think you're going to have an intimidated team whatsoever come out in that game on Friday. And Bishop Dwenger, one of those teams that always seems to be playing their best football toward the end of the year. What have they won? 5 straight sectional championships for a reason, including last year knocking off Snyder in that sectional championship. So by no means look past this game.
Let's talk about 4A Sectional 19. We said at the beginning of the playoffs, this is the sectional where you say, hey, it's probably the most wide open, the most number of teams that could possibly win a sectional championship. And we get another great matchup in Leo at East Noble. I love this rivalry because, yes, it's intense, and yes, they're battling for a conference championship each season, but there's a true respect between these programs. You see it in the players. Like, sometimes players don't like players from the other team, but at media day, these guys are always talking to each other, Leo and East Noble. Like, it's a good thing for high school football. 28-21 early in the season, Leo victorious. So how do you see this one playing out? Because both of these teams are a lot different than what we saw when they played early in the season in September.
They were, and that was a good win by East Noble last week to get going and win on the road at Angola, particularly in that second half in which they were really able to run the ball at will against Angola. And then Leo escapes, kind of struggled there early on with Southside, and then was able to do what they needed to do to win, and a big night for Brock Schott, particularly defensively with those 4 sacks. And so with this matchup, it's always been a great one, regular season or playoffs, particularly recently when we've had 2 top-flight programs. A little bit less this year, particularly with East Noble, but I don't think it takes away from this one at all. And Leo is looking for taking that next step, of course. Haven't won a sectional championship in 11 years. What better way to get Coach Dorfler's career started than winning one this year?
Yeah, and the winner of that game will play the winner of DeKalb at Columbia City. Columbia City, I mean, again, 2 weeks in a row, instant classics, winning in the final minute with a Josh Arntz touchdown. They have to be riding high, but those victories have been so close, they can't get overconfident, which is something you love to see at this point in the season that they're not going to have to deal with. And DeKalb, we both liked DeKalb at the beginning of the season. Their regular season wasn't what we thought it could be, but they come around after losing by 20 to New Haven in the regular season and win last week. How do you see this one playing out? Because, again, DeKalb's playing arguably its best football of the season, and even though they only scored 17 last Friday, we know they can put up big-time points. It comes down to stopping teams.
Well, and it's Tegan Irk, and he's going to be the best quarterback that Columbia City has faced. That was the case that in the regular season. It still is the case now in terms of slinging it over the field. But the key for DeKalb, and this was key last Friday in knocking off New Haven, was their defense. They were finally able to stop some teams. Have been able to get into shootouts, but just can't get consistent stops. They were able to do that against New Haven. If they can continue that momentum into Columbia City, they have a shot to at least hang around. And Columbia City, it's just like they're playing with house money at this point. Like, you never know from week to week. Down 12 against Norwell, come back and win. Down with 1:20 to go at Wayne last week and pull out wins. At the very least, blood pressure medicine of Brett Fox hopefully is being elevated a little bit, because I can't imagine being on the sidelines the last 2 weeks.
No, but man, it's been great football to
It
watch.
has.
It's been fun stuff, no matter who you root for. I also want to give a shout out because talking about 4A sectional 20, Huntington North.
How about that?
And they went down to Muncie Central and they
smackdown on 'em.
smacked the Bearcats from the beginning.
Yeah.
Put up 40 plus. They've got to take on Mississinawa at home this week. I think that'll be a dogfight, to be honest with you. I know Mississinawa comes in as a bit of a favorite there,
Yeah.
but Huntington North, man, I thought it was going to be 50-50 throw up, jump ball game,
Right.
if you will, last week at Muncie Central, and they had no problem.
They
with
had
the
it was like
Bearcats.
at one point it was like 40-0, and there was
Yeah.
one of the, you're going through Twitter, and you're like,
Ooh.
you're like, hold on, am I reading that right? Yeah, no, it was 40-0. But credit to Bob Prescott, one of the better coaches, more personable guys that we deal with.
I love the guy.
And you just would love Huntington North to get on some sort of roll, so you get to go down there more now, especially with the new digs down there in Huntington. It's a great facility, and Prescott's a great dude. And now they match up with a Mississinawa team that's not that much better than them. And I feel if you can get that running game going again and play some good defense, then you got a shot. It'd be really cool to see Huntington North pull off another one.
The Brother Nation is alive and well.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about 3A Sectional 27. You got Norwell at Concordia, Garrett at Yorktown. Norwell got off to a bit of a slow start against Heritage.
Yep.
Some credit to Heritage. I saw them in person for the first time, and their defense and their lines are a little bit bigger than you thought. And I thought
Yeah.
the defense played really well in the first half, aside from giving up 2 plays. But it was 7-0 with 2 minutes to go before halftime.
Right.
And then the ball game eventually got away from them after a Luke Kraft touchdown. But I thought Norwell would come out angry.
Yeah, right.
And look to smack someone like, oof.
Yeah.
Heritage, that's not a terrible draw for them, but you're like, we're catching them at the wrong time. I kind of wanted to see more oomph from Norwell out of
Sure.
the gate in that one. How do they
Yeah.
fare against Concordia?
Well, and that's a danger, because you go to Concordia and they're going to have some more dynamic playmakers than Heritage does. And if you come out slow against Concordia, they'll be able to put up some quick points on you. You would like to see Norwell get back to where they were before Week 9 and just start humming along, because if we look at the expectations for Norwell prior to Week 9, we said this is a team that can come out of the North in 3A. And at least the last 2 weeks, we look at it and go, well, maybe, but they need to start playing better football. And you'd like to see them hit the ground running against Concordia. But last week we saw Columbia City struggle against Wayne. We saw Leo struggle against Southside. So this is going on the road against an SAC opponent. The NE8 hasn't necessarily been lights out early on in the playoffs against the SAC. Could this be at least a closer game than a lot of people think?
And Garrett at Yorktown. Yorktown only beat Delta like 10-7 last week.
Yeah.
And Robert Koski for Garrett against Belmont, but ran for over 300
Right.
yards. I guess I know what the game plan is if you're Yorktown against the Railroaders. Is simply stop the run.
Stop the run. It's pretty much like playing Huntington North. You just want to stop the run.
Stop
But
the run.
Credit to the Railroaders. Start off 0-6. They've been 3-1 since then.
And it was a disaster of kind of epic proportions.
It was rough.
Off the sidelines, it did not start off well for
No,
Garrett, but they've
absolutely.
rallied the troops.
Yeah, credit to Coach DePew and those kids staying active, staying locked in, and being able to turn it around. Now you're playing into Week 11, and who would have thought that a month and a half ago at the Railroaders?
Let's talk about 2A Sectional 35, Lures at Busco, East Side at Manchester. East Side, a big favorite in that game against Manchester, but Lures at Churubusco intrigues me. Busco's kind of flown under the radar, but they're 8-2. Could they come up, especially at home, and maybe put a scare into the Knights?
I think so. I think when we look at Bishop Lures, and they're good, and I know some people want to talk about them making a run in 2A, I just don't see the dominance at the 2A level that we're used to. I know they had Prairie Heights last week, but when we look at Bishop Lures a lot of years in 2A, we're saying nobody can match up with their playmaking. But I don't think we can say that this year. And I know they have good guys like Nick Thompson. McInturf has been solid, but I'm not looking at Bishop Lures going, Churubusco can't match up at all. I feel like it's a different narrative. I think Churubusco can hold itself its own in the trenches, and if they can make this thing a dirty, rough, muddy if it rains, something that's very, very blue collar, then maybe it helps Churubusco. This could be a game that everybody's going to look forward to, that Bishop Lures East Side inevitable matchup in Week 12. Bishop Lewis can't afford to do that because they have the much more challenging task than Eastside does this week. So they go on the road to Turtletown. They cannot afford to lay an egg.
Yeah, if Churubusco has 6-7 minute drives where they continue
Yeah.
to pound the football 3+ yards in a cloud of dust, like Coach Sade likes to do. I know they can throw it a bit with Riley Burroff this year, which is they did with Tom Richards a little bit as well.
Right.
So it is something you see occasionally with Churubusco. But man, if they can have those long, sustained drives and keep the ball away from Bishop Lures, that could make this game very interesting. Let's talk about 1A Sectional 44, South Adams at Adams Central, Madison Grant and Northfield. Obviously, eyes on South Adams at Adams Central, but boy, I thought Southwood would hang around for a little while.
No, 35-0 at the end of first.
Wow. This was 49-20 in the regular season when they played their annual Week 6 matchup. I hope for fans' sake that it is closer than that.
Hope so.
But it seems like South Adams, they had 64 points last week, but Adams Central, my goodness, these boys are focused and ready to roll.
It's going to be extremely difficult for South Adams. We know a couple of years ago when South Adams was really good and got clipped by Adams Central in the playoffs, and you're thinking, okay, turnabout's fair play. Maybe we can see that this year. For South Adams, and I told Grant Mosier this over the weekend, and I really wasn't joking. I'm like, I would not punt, and I would go onside kick every time. I mean, unless you back up your – obviously, 4th and 20, your own 8, you're punting. But I'm saying, like, you have to use all 4 downs. You have to score every time because I just don't see you being able to slow down Adams Central. Because it's easy to slow down Adams Central. You say, I got to stop the run. But it's easier said than done.
Right.
If you don't have personnel that can do that, then you need to keep scoring. And for South Adams, we know they can score, putting up 20 points with South Adams. But I'm serious. Every time you score, I'm onside kicking. I'm not kick. You have to take traditional football out of the equation if you're going to be able to beat Adams Central, particularly if they come in and don't beat themselves. If you're going to beat Adams Central, you need to pull out all the stops. And I go back to Brett Fox, 3 back-to-back-to-back onside kicks against New Haven, and goes for it early and deep in his own territory against Norwell. Granted, it was a missed call, but it set the tone as like we're going to do anything we need to do to win this game. And I feel like that's what South Adams needs to do on Friday.
Well, what are you most looking forward to about this coming week? Because we've gone over a ton of games, and there really are some good matchups pretty much in every single classification, whereas last week you really had to pick and choose. There were only a handful of games where you said, that one, I don't know how that one's going to turn out.
I think it's put up or shut up for me in 5A and 6A. For me, I'm looking at Carroll, Penn, and going, that's a terrible matchup. And if Carroll can come out of that with a win, I'm feeling a little bit better about the Chargers in the North in Class 6A. It's still murder, like I said, but you feel a little bit better. And then 5A is, can Snyder overcome Dwenger, unlike last year, and set up a matchup next week, which we assume would be Northside and Snyder for that championship. So very much put up or shut up for me in 5A. Bishop Dwenger wants another shot at Snyder. Carroll wants to prove it's legit for its first game outside the SAC. We'll find out some of those answers on Friday.
And we'll be talking about it next Monday here on Inside the Zone. For Justin Kenny, I'm Glenn Marini, and we'll see you next week.